Welcome to Crisis in Perception, where we examine the systems shaping our world. Today, we're talking about Lyndon Johnson's Great Society, but we're going to do it a little differently. We're going to look past the legendary personality of LBJ himself and instead deconstruct the system he was working inside of, the congressional power architecture of the 1960s. We'll look at what I'm calling the locked pipeline of Congress, the rules that kept it that way, what it took to finally force it open, why the changes actually stuck around, and how all of this connected to the bigger picture of American history.
So let's start with that system. What did the United States Congress actually look and feel like in the early 1960s, before all the fireworks? You know, there's this nostalgia sometimes for a past when politics just worked better. Well, the reality, as historian Julian Zelizer points out, was pretty much the opposite. Congress in the early 60s was defined by gridlock. It wasn't just slow, it was fundamentally broken, a place where big ideas and ambitious legislation went to die. And I mean, this image just says it all, doesn't it? That's Senator Prescott Bush of Connecticut, literally taking a nap during a filibuster. His exhaustion became this perfect symbol for what a lot of people were calling the sapless branch of government. It was an institution completely paralyzed by its own rules. So here's the best way to think about this system. Imagine a pressure-regulated pipeline. Every single bill, every proposal, every idea had to move through this pipeline to become law. But, and this is the key, all along the way there were these incredibly powerful gatekeepers. Think of them as valves that could slow the flow down to a trickle or just shut it off completely whenever they wanted. And who were these gatekeepers? Well, these valves were the core components of the whole system. You had committee chairs who were basically kings of their own little fiefdoms with the power to kill any bill they didn't like. They got that power through an ironclad seniority rule. Often, they were part of what was called the Conservative Coalition, this informal but super effective alliance of Southern Democrats and Midwestern Republicans. And then you had these major choke points, like the House Rules Committee run by the infamous Howard Judge Smith or the filibuster in the Senate. These could stop any piece of legislation dead in its tracks. So you have to ask, how does a system get so stuck? It's not an accident, right? It was held in place by a really powerful set of incentives. There were clear rules of the game that kept the whole thing running, or not running. The path to real power was actually pretty straightforward. But it created some really weird incentives. First, you had to get elected in a super safe, non-competitive district. For a lot of these guys, that meant a rural district in the South. This meant you never had to really worry about being challenged. Then you just stayed. You won re-election again and again and again, racking up seniority. And eventually, if your party was in the majority, boom, you became a committee chair. Your power had almost nothing to do with your ideas or your loyalty to the party's platform. It was just about time served. Now, the story we all know, the popular myth, is that one man just blew this whole system up, Lyndon Johnson, using his legendary treatment. You've probably heard about this intense, in-your-face style of persuasion that was supposedly so overwhelming, almost hypnotic, that he could bend anyone to his will. But here's the question we have to ask. Was any amount of personal force, no matter how legendary, really enough to overcome a system that was structurally designed from top to bottom to produce gridlock? Or was something much bigger going on? And this is where it gets really interesting, because that lock system wasn't broken by one man. It was temporarily forced open by massive external pressure. The valves didn't disappear. For a moment, they were just completely overpowered. Suddenly, this incredible window of opportunity opened up. In 1963, you had the moral force of the civil rights movement creating this undeniable public pressure for the government to do something. Then, in '64, Barry Goldwater suffers a crushing defeat in the presidential election, which sweeps in these huge liberal majorities in Congress. This creates what's known as the fabulous 89th Congress, which just passed an absolute torrent of legislation. But that window started to close pretty fast, as backlash over the Vietnam War and racial tensions gave conservatives a big boost in the '66 midterms. And I mean, the math here just tells the whole story. Before that '64 election, the conservative coalition basically had a 92-vote majority in the House. They could kill almost anything they wanted. After the election, the numbers were completely flipped. For that one brief 2-year period, liberals had the raw voting power to bypass the old gatekeepers and just push their agenda straight through the pipeline. And this is the key. Focusing only on LBJ's personality creates a crisis in perception. It makes us miss the real story, which is the temporary but massive structural shift in the political landscape.
It wasn't about one man's incredible will, it was about a fundamental change in the political physics of Congress itself.
So that raises another question. If the window closed so quickly, why did all these programs stick around? Well, once they were passed, they started to build their own foundation. This legislation turned out to be incredibly durable.
This quote from 2009 is just perfect. You have a Tea Party supporter, someone who is ideologically against big government programs, passionately defending Medicare, one of the crown jewels of the Great Society. How does that even happen? It shows you just how deeply and how quickly these policies got woven into the very fabric of American life. You see, new policies create their own persistence. Once things like Medicare, Medicaid, and federal aid to education were on the books, you had to create huge new federal agencies to actually run them. You created vast networks of millions and millions of beneficiaries, senior citizens, low-income families, students, who now depended on them. Getting rid of these programs wasn't just a matter of passing a new law. It became politically toxic and structurally almost impossible.
Okay, so finally, let's zoom all the way out, because this congressional pipeline, it wasn't operating in a vacuum. It was deeply connected with all these other huge forces that were transforming the country. The stuff happening inside Congress was both a cause and an effect of these other massive shifts. The Civil Rights Act, for example, sped up a historic political realignment in the South. The growing power of network television news was shaping how the entire nation talked and thought about civil rights in the war in Vietnam. And the Great Society itself was this fundamental expansion of the federal government, changing the relationship between citizens and Washington forever. So in the end, what the Great Society really shows us is that structures, not just statesmen, are what shape history. If you really want to understand how profound change happens, you have to look past the personalities, no matter how big they are, and start analyzing the underlying architecture of power. This project is free and publicly accessible. If you'd like to support the time, tools, and research behind crisis and perception, you can become a supporter on Patreon. For a longer audio-based analysis of this topic, see the deep dive linked in the description. If you enjoy this kind of systems-level analysis, please like, subscribe, and comment with books or topics you'd like us to explore next.